Hello everyone. In this video, we will learn how to connect a Spring Boot application to PostgreSQL. We will cover how to add PostgreSQL dependency, create a table using schema.sql, and insert some data using data.sql. And finally, we will try to access these records using Spring Data REST. Let's get started. Let's start the project by adding the required dependencies. The required dependencies for this particular one is PostgreSQL in order to connect it to the PostgreSQL database and Spring Boot Starter Data JDBC. These will help us to work with the database connections required for this current tutorial. Now, let's go to application.properties and try to add the connection details. Let's try to add the required dependencies. The dependencies that we are adding is all related to the database connections. So if you see these dependencies, the Spring datasource URL tells you what should be the URL for database connection. If you see, I have kept the database port currently as empty because we need to find what on which port the PostgreSQL is running and exposed. After that, if you see, it is connecting to my database, and then the user for that is my user, and the password is a very secret password called secret. Since we will be running our database, which is PostgreSQL, with the help of a Docker, so let's see what is our Docker compose YAML.file looks like. So it also says the same parameter, which is my user, secret, and my database as the database name, password, and the username, which is very much similar to this one. But the port where we will know, which will be exposed to us only once we start it. So let's just start this Docker file first. So as you see, the Docker file has started. So let me go to another terminal just to verify which port is exposed for us. So if you see here, it is telling that this port is exposed for us. So I'll just take this port name and copy it. And I'll try to replace it in the application.properties file where we have written database port. So this is the same port over which the connections are actually exposed. Now we do have a connection parameter set. So let's add a SQL file, which we will call schema.sql, which will contain the schema for our related demo. So we'll go into resources folder, create a schema file here. We'll create a file and a resource called schema.sql. And we'll add the schema related information. So if you see this, we have created a table which is called app users, and then what we are trying to do here, we are trying to create a serial key, which is ID, which is a primary key for us, then the first name, last name, country, and mail. Now let's create a data.sql, which will have the data related values, which will actually insert a row into this. So as you see, this one will actually go and insert in the schema with first name, last name, country, and email. So once the system starts, the expectation is the schema should get created and data.sql should insert the values into that table. Now let's create a record and call it user record. So if you see, this is the same table under which we are trying to create. So this record has app user data, and if you see here, this integer ID, and we have annotated with @ID, and also there is a table which is app user, and this is the same table which we created in schema.sql. Let's create the repository layer. Repository layers are created just to keep the database related information and the logic in it. So we'll create an interface and we call it user repository. And this one we will extend with crude repository, which is provided by Spring Data REST. So if you see, it is actually taking two different parameters here. One is the class itself and the ID. So if you see, there is a T and then an ID, right? So we'll give the record name that we had along with the ID for it. So we have created user record. So this will help us to save the user related information, and the ID is integer. Right? So now once this is getting created, let's annotate it with the correct Spring annotation, which is called @repository. As I said, this is actually required. This is our stereotype annotations. And if you understand that, so basically this is actually created only for keeping the logics of database. And it will create a Spring Bean for user repository. Now let's add a service class. In this service class, we will try to auto-wire the repository that we have created. So we will try to inject it. Now we'll create two different methods to fetch and save the user. So it is using the method which is inside user repository, and since user repository is actually extending to the crude repository, here we do have save and all of the methods. So this is actually the way where Spring help us to save, edit, and do all kind of different operations. Now what we'll do, we will annotate this service class with a Spring annotation called @service. Once we do that, Spring will create a bean of it, and it can be used anywhere within the Spring context. So we'll take this one and we'll try to inject it into the user service application that was started. And we'll also implement this user service application, which is the starting point of our Spring application, with command line runner. If we do so, we'll have to implement one of the method which is coming from command line runner, which is called run. The purpose of this method is to execute once the service has started. Any code which you want to execute after the service has started, you can put it inside the run method. So let's add the dependency here for user service. So inside this run method, we will use a service class to call and save a new record, and also to fetch all the records which are presented to the database. So let's see. So this is a record which we are trying to create after the system starts, just to verify that our connection details are working fine. And let's fetch all the records which are already presented to the database. So that is fine. So the table got created, and it also has only two records now. So let me try to fetch them. So as you can see, there are two records which is present here. So this concludes this particular part where we are trying to connect to the database. So in this tutorial, we tried to create a record, we tried to insert it into the database, And we also understood how we can actually connect to database from a Spring Boot application.